afternoon. We're coming to you with major breaking news from the world of politics. Supreme Court Justice Anthony M. Kennedy announcing he will retire. This leaves a major opening on the Supreme Court of the United States for President Donald J. Trump to fill. Anthony Kennedy, a swing vote, a key justice on the Supreme Court. Let's go straight to our chief anchor, George Stephanopoulos, with what this means. George, break it down for us.
First of all, this is Titanic, Dan. This is big breaking news, as you said. Not only has Justice Kennedy been a key swing vote on the Supreme Court, he has been the swing vote, the deciding justice in so many closely held 5-4 decisions. One of the few justices, with the exception perhaps of Justice Roberts on a couple of cases, willing to side with the justices appointed by Democratic presidents on the Supreme Court on issues like gay rights, gay marriage, abortion, so many other key social issues. Justice Kennedy has been the key vote. This is setting up a massive battle for the Supreme Court, gives President Trump a chance to put a decisive stamp on the Supreme Court, but you can expect Democrats to look at anyone that President Trump appoints to the Supreme Court with a close eye, with scrutiny, fighting it all the way. What they remember is that when President Obama had the chance to appoint a Supreme Court justice in his last year, Republicans blocked it, did not let them fill the vacancy. They're going to fight this hard.
But George, let's put up a list of the current Supreme Court justices. You can see, viewers at home will be able to see on the left side of the screen those who lean liberal, and on the right side those who lean conservative. Kennedy occupying that key central middle spot there. So talk to us again about his key role and what it will mean for the court going forward if Donald J. Trump can place his pick in his stead.
Well, when you look at the list of judges that President Trump is considering for the Supreme Court, when you look at Neil Gorsuch, his first choice for the Supreme Court with the first vacancy that he was able to fill last year, he is much more likely to appoint someone who is in the mode of Justice Alito, Justice Thomas, solid conservatives on the court, like Justice Gorsuch, rather than someone like Justice Kennedy, who has been someone who's moved between the coalitions, moved between the liberals and conservatives on different issues in order to form those 5-4 majorities. This would, if President Trump gets his way with whoever he appoints, he is going to have a Supreme Court that is decidedly conservative, that is able to form much more decisive majorities around some of these big issues.
Let's get it to ABC News Chief White House Correspondent John Karl, who's standing by in our Washington bureau. John, give us a sense. I know it's early. It's extremely early. This news is just minutes old. But how likely is it for the president to be able to get his pick through?
I think it's going to be an epic battle, as George just mentioned. But I have talked to people involved on the president's team on this, and they are going to push to get a person nominated and confirmed before the midterm elections. That will be a monumental task. Democrats will do everything in their power to prevent that from happening. Remember, the Republicans have right now, Dan, simply a 1-seat majority in the Senate. Thanks to the way they have changed the rules, they can confirm a justice on a simple majority. And they will want to get this done before the midterm elections, before there is any chance that majority goes away. And I am told also that list that you heard George mention, the list of conservative judges that the president elect back in November, but back after the election put out, is the list that they will be going from to look for a replacement for Kennedy. In other words, a hard-line conservative. The people on the president's team involved in this do not believe in the tradition of you replace a moderate with a moderate. There will be an effort to replace Kennedy with somebody that would decisively sway the balance of power in the Supreme Court.
John, let's talk about the U.S. Senate, because this is where it's all going to come down to the United States Senate. And as you said, the Republicans have a one-vote majority there. So there are Republican senators who have contentious relationships with the President of the United States. John McCain comes to mind. Jeff Flake from Arizona comes to mind. So is it possible that we could see members of the president's own party stop him on this?
No question. Also, there's a question of John McCain has not been in Washington for a vote for some time, obviously suffering from brain cancer. He's been back in Arizona. There's a question of whether or not he would even be here to cast a vote which they would need potentially. And also you have Susan Collins, who hasn't had as an openly contentious a relationship with the president as somebody like Jeff Flake or John McCain, but who is very much a moderate, pro-abortion rights Republican who could potentially balk at the idea of somebody that would do away, for instance, with Roe v. Wade. There would be a decisive vote to do away with Roe v. Wade. So this, even if the Republicans, even if the president can manage to get somebody nominated, to get through confirmation hearings and get to a vote on the U.S. Senate before the midterms with that one-seat majority, it will be very difficult to get somebody from this list of judges that they're working from.
And let's bring back in our chief anchor, George Stephanopoulos, on the phone, who wants to weigh in on this score. George.
Let me pick up on that. I think John's exactly right. There's going to be enormous pressure on every Republican to hang together with the president and approve his nominee. Judges has been one of the policy issues that has really been a glue for the Republican Party. On the other hand, with that one-seat majority that John is talking about, every Republican senator is going to have tremendous leverage. You've had people like Jeff Flake, you mentioned him, Bob Corker, the senator from Tennessee. Both of them are going to be retiring from the Senate. Both of them, Senator Flake especially, has talked about holding up judicial nominations if he doesn't get his way, if the president insists on imposing tariffs and other Republican issues. Bob Corker has been quite critical of the president on tariffs as well. As John mentioned, Senator Susan Collins, also Senator Lisa Murkowski of Alaska might be another senator who would be reluctant to vote for a justice who is going to overturn Roe v. Wade. So this is going to be a monumental battle. Now, there is a question on the Democratic side as well. You've got some Democrats in red states who are up for re-election, Joe Manchin in West Virginia, Heidi Heitkamp in North Dakota, who are going to be facing some pressure to vote with the president and against their party on this issue. But this is the kind of issue that tends to galvanize parties, tends to bring them together. I really think we can't overstate how big a battle this is going to be.
As if we did not already live in interesting times. Let's bring in ABC News Supreme Court reporter Terry Moran, who's been covering the court for many, many years. Terry, as we round out this special report, would you hold forth for a little bit on the legacy of soon-to-be retiring Justice Anthony M. Kennedy? In particular, we know he made his mark on gay rights.
He did. Will go down in history as a great justice at the vanguard of the gay liberation movement in the law. An unlikely candidate for that. He was originally 30 years ago now, he came to the court after the nomination of Robert Bork, the staunch conservative, failed. And that was the most epic battle for the Supreme Court that anyone had seen up to that time. And it makes sense in some ways that Kennedy's replacement will face a similar epic battle. But in addition to gay rights, Justice Kennedy was very important in other fields as well. For example, when he came on the court, there was a pitched battle to overturn Roe versus Wade. And many people thought at the time that he would be the vote to overturn Roe versus Wade. He helped preserve the core of that decision. And now as he leaves, it is once again an open question about that decision and others. But he leaves a legacy of a libertarian bent and a gentle approach in many ways that is, frankly, out of step with the times that we're in today.
Terry Moran, John Carl, and George Stephanopoulos, thank you all. Again, the breaking news, Justice Anthony M. Kennedy stepping down from the Supreme Court at the age of 81 years old after 30 monumental years on the court. This is a huge breaking news story. We will continue to cover it all day long on ABC News Radio and abcnews.com. We'll have much more coming up on World News Tonight with David Muir. For now, I'm Dan Harris in New York. Thank you.
This has been a special report from ABC News.
We're covering breaking news here. Justice Anthony Kennedy set to retire from the Supreme Court. We got a quote, if we can pull it up now. It is a quote from him. He says, "It has been the greatest honor and privilege to serve our nation in the federal judiciary for 43 years, 30 of those years on the Supreme Court." Again, Justice Anthony M. Kennedy has just announced that he'll be retiring. This had been debated and talked about for some time, and clearly now he is making his decision known. He is known, or was known, as a moderate conservative, as our Terry Moran just said. It's kind of out of times for where we are today. It's kind of this ability to side with folks on different sides of the aisle. He played that middle role, and he played it well. We are going to be going to some of our correspondents in the Washington, D.C. area in just a short minute, but for the time being, let me give you a little bit more information now. Justice Kennedy is 81 years old, and he has been involved in a number of decisive votes that have had a huge impact on our society. I'm getting some information now from my producer, and we're going to go to John Carl now, who's in Washington, D.C. John, we spoke earlier today related to Supreme Court on some of these matters, but how big is this announcement today?
Big. Understand that Justice Kennedy was the pivotal middle of the 9-member Supreme Court. In many of these major cases that went before the Supreme Court, it really became government lawyers, plaintiffs would talk about really everybody trying to persuade a single justice, Justice Kennedy, because you knew on many of these big decisions where the 4 liberal justices would come down. You knew basically where the 4 conservative justices were going to come down, and the question was, how would Justice Kennedy vote? This is the center of the Supreme Court. By replacing Justice Kennedy, if he is able to do so, and able to put a conservative in the mold of an Antonin Scalia or a John Roberts in that role, President Trump will be effectively able to control the direction of the court, perhaps for the next generation. This is a very big move, a huge vacancy, and it will be fought. The fight over whoever the president picks to replace Kennedy will be one of the most consequential legislative battles that we will see in the Trump presidency.
John Carl, thank you so much. I'm going to go over to Rick Klein now. Rick, thank you for joining us here. I'm curious if you can help me kind of better understand how Senate Republicans in that one-vote advantage really will dictate in what direction this moves forward.
Well, keep in mind, they are already bragging about having influenced the balance of the court. It was Mitch McConnell's decision in the spring of 2016 to not even hold a hearing on President Obama's nomination after the death of Antonin Scalia that allowed that seat to remain open, allowed the president to name another solid conservative, and allowed the court to keep its current balance. We saw the image just yesterday, Mitch McConnell seeming to troll the country with the image of him shaking hands with Justice Gorsuch because of the big opinion that came out on the travel ban. So the country has seen in real time in the last few days the influence, the importance of the Supreme Court and these 5-4 decisions. Keep in mind, though, that this has just been to maintain the status quo. Taking a Kennedy off and replacing with a solid, dependable, reliable conservative cements a 5-4 conservative majority. So that could mean abortion rights is suddenly in the mix. You could see an overturning of Roe v. Wade, just for starters. Literally anything that the court has done as established precedent, any of those narrow rulings could be up for grabs because, as George Stephanopoulos pointed out a few moments ago on our air, it's not like he was a swing justice. He was the swing justice. He was the one that both sides had to appeal to for decades now. And we haven't seen a change in the balance of power in the Supreme Court for decades. It has been a long time since there's been anything close to an opening this important.
It's interesting you point that out. You mentioned the swing justice. You know, it's often said that there are extremes on both sides, and the truth lies somewhere in the middle. It's hard not to think of Justice Kennedy in that way in terms of his ability to play the middle a little bit. Rick, the president has talked a lot about in recent days these midterms, right? And the idea that he wanted to delay votes for certain things. We anticipate that there may be a rush to vote in this particular case before the midterms now. Is that right?
Yeah, our reporting at ABC News, according to an outside advisor to the White House, is that there will be a press to name a nominee and get quick hearings and a confirmation vote before the November elections. That's critical because right now the Republicans hold a 51-49 edge. That edge is in jeopardy. They may win a seat or two. They could easily lose a seat or two. And if you don't have a majority, you don't get anything done. The rules have been changed for Supreme Court nominations. The Democrats changed them for lower court nominations to allow a 50-vote threshold to pass a judge, and then the first to invoke that on the Republican side happened with Gorsuch's nomination just last year. So you just need that bare majority, but you need every vote you can get. So the push will be on to enshrine this new justice in the next couple of months. That throws a mammoth political story into the middle of a mammoth political election season. Everything literally could be on the ballot in some way or another, depending on how the next couple months play out, depending on who the nominee is and what kind of pace is used to hold a hearing. Keep in mind, Mitch McConnell made that decision about 9 months before a presidential election, saying that he would allow the voters to speak up and have their say. There will be quite a few Democrats who will say the same thing now and say, wait a second, Mitch, let's let the voters weigh in before we hand a lifetime appointment to the court to anyone. But of course, the next presidential election is 2.5 years away, not less than a year away. So the Republicans, I expect, will follow a much different standard and a much different timeline than they did when President Obama named Merrick Garland.
Rick Klein for us there in Washington, D.C. Again, we're covering this breaking news. Justice Anthony M. Kennedy has announced that he will be retiring at 81 years old. Again, he was nominated by President Reagan and took his oath of office back in February of 1988. He played a very, very important role. His ability to sway, his ability to play the middle, his ability to really affect a lot of change. I'm joined now by Terry Moran. Terry, first of all, you and I talked earlier this morning. You told me there were no retirements happening, and here we are, man. You lied to me.
You know, I'm keeping my track record absolutely perfect on never predicting these things correctly in anything in courts, right? Anyway, and I had heard just this morning that essentially Kennedy had given some indication that he wasn't retiring. Obviously, all that was wrong, and we are right now in this epic battle. I'll tell you, I am old enough, Zachary, to remember, and in fact, I covered Anthony Kennedy's nomination to the Supreme Court back in 1987. It was the first big story I ever covered, the Bork nomination and then Kennedy. And so here we are facing the biggest battle over the Supreme Court since that time, but the Republicans are in an incredibly strong position. This has been an effort by the Republican Party since Richard Nixon was elected in 1968 to undo what they saw as the liberal drift in law. And election after election, nominee after nominee, they couldn't quite get there. They thought Anthony Kennedy was going to be one of their stalwarts, but he upheld Roe versus Wade, and he was, and I think will go down in history as the great jurist of gay rights. Unlikely in some ways, being a staid, middle-of-the-road Republican, but his writings, the decisions, the way he wrote about gay rights, including them in the great tradition of equal protection in the Constitution, there's no question that is his towering achievement.
Terry, you know, I think there's probably a lot of people watching this broadcast now, a younger generation that maybe haven't been tapped into politics in ways in the past that they are now. Can you help us better understand what this means in terms of balance, and then how the ripple effect of that, you know, impacts our society as a whole?
That's right. Well, the Supreme Court has been the place where we have always gone to settle the most contentious issues in the country, whether it was segregation, which at first was upheld by the Supreme Court, then overturned in Brown versus Board, abortion, the death penalty, and all kinds of issues around how the government functions, the power of the president, all kinds of things. The Supreme Court is the ultimate arbiter. As the great Chief Justice John Marshall says, it is the province and duty of the judiciary to say what the law is. And that means every single American is affected by the rulings of the Supreme Court. And really, for the past better part of a decade now, and certainly going beyond that, his influence, it has been the court of Justice Anthony Kennedy. He's the crucial vote. If you can get Justice Kennedy's vote, you will get the ruling. And that has been the rule on gay rights, on affirmative action, where he went the other way. He was against affirmative action. Just yesterday, on the travel ban, he sided with the conservatives on the travel ban, but wrote separately to condemn the kind of language that he heard coming out of President Trump, although he didn't name him, and other government officials. So this is power at stake at the highest level right now with this one seat on the Supreme Court. And I must say, elections have consequences. President Trump won that election. The Republicans have taken control of the Senate. They hold it narrowly. But if there's one thing I heard again and again on the campaign trail from Republicans, in particular evangelical Republicans who might have been having trouble with some of Donald Trump's issues, they said the court, the Supreme Court, that's the most important thing. So I would be surprised, frankly, if they had a lot of defections from whomever President Trump nominates. But as I demonstrated this morning, my predictions are not that reliable.
Terry, let me ask you this. How important, in your opinion, is this kind of this moderate mindset in this world that we live in right now, where it just seems like folks are on both ends of the extreme, and there's just not enough folks in the middle willing to work it out?
Well, that's the middle is where you get things done. And right now we're in a mood as a country, for all kinds of reasons, to go to our corners and fight it out. Anthony Kennedy, Justice Kennedy, was one of those in the middle. And he wrote, I always thought of him, I covered his nomination, as I say, I'll never forget, he was obviously a much younger man 30 years ago. He appeared with his family and his young sons, and listening to him in his nomination hearing and reading him over the years, I always thought of him as Justice Dad in a way. He had a way of explaining his view of the law and his view of the Constitution in a way that almost sounded like like an Ozzie and Harriet era dad at a dinner table explaining things to the youngsters. He had a common touch and a very moderate way of approaching things. The key word for Justice Kennedy, for example, on gay rights was dignity. He saw the laws around homosexuality that were relics of a time long past as offenses against the dignity and the liberty guaranteed to every American, including gay Americans. And that carried through his jurisprudence. If you read Kennedy's opinions, some of it is dense law, but a lot of it you'll get because he wanted it to speak to the people. And it was the people's court in some ways, he recognized. And he was right in the middle. That's gone. The court, I think, at the end of the day, is going to shift decisively to the right without Anthony Kennedy. And who knows what that will mean in the long run. In the very short run, I guarantee you they're going to get some cases which will try to overturn Roe versus Wade, the decision that guaranteed a woman's right to choose an abortion. And that is, I would say right now, an open question as to whether that will survive.
Terry Moran with us in Washington, D.C. We sure appreciate your insight there, Terry, describing a thoughtful Justice Kennedy. We're going to go now to Rick Klein, who's going to provide a little bit more insight for us. Again, Rick, we've been talking about this breaking news, this justice that has decided to retire and the big battle that it will set up. Can you help me understand how this might impact something like Roe versus Wade?
Well, here's an interesting factoid, is that there's been a balance on the court for the last couple of decades. President Clinton got to make 2 selections to the court, liberal justices who still serve right now. President Bush got to make 2 selections, conservative justices joining the court. President Obama got to make 2 liberal selections. But none of that changed the fact that we had an almost even divide with Justice Kennedy right there smack in the middle. He surprised some folks by siding with the so-called pro-choice folks and upholding the core of Roe v. Wade, even while adding some restrictions. But when you add him to the conservative side, if you were able to flip that vote based on whoever's named, you would have 5 relatively solid conservative justices. That changes the math, 5-4 in the other direction. President Trump, when he was a candidate, said that Roe v. Wade would basically be gone if he wins. That may become reality depending on how this plays out and who he ends up selecting. If he decides to go with someone that's been on his list in the past, someone on the more conservative, solid side, then Roe v. Wade is just among a long list of established precedents in the Supreme Court that could change in the coming months or years.
Hey, Rick, we're going to pivot now. I appreciate your insight. We're going to go to Mitch McConnell, who's on the floor right now, giving us a statement here. Let's go to that.
The Senate stands ready to fulfill its constitutional role by offering advice and consent on President Trump's nominee to fill this vacancy. We will vote to confirm Justice Kennedy's successor this fall. As in the case of Justice Gorsuch, senators will have the opportunity to meet with President Trump's nominee, examine his or her qualifications, and debate the nomination. I have every confidence in Chairman Grassley's conduct of the upcoming confirmation process in the Judiciary Committee. It's imperative that the President's nominee be considered fairly and not subjected to personal attacks. Thus far, President Trump's judicial nominations have reflected a keen understanding of the vital role that judges play in our constitutional order. Judges must interpret the law fairly and apply it even-handedly. Judicial decisions must not flow from judges' personal philosophies or preferences, but from an honest assessment of the words and actual meaning of the law. This bedrock principle has clearly defined the President's excellent choices to date. So we'll look forward to yet another outstanding selection, but today the Senate and the nation thank Justice Kennedy for his years of service on the bench and for his many contributions to jurisprudence and to our nation. I suggest the opposite quorum.
McConnell there, speaking of Justice Kennedy's retirement, I'm joined now by Allie Rogan. She's on the Hill. Allie, can you help me better understand how both Senate and Congress are reacting to this news?
Yeah, absolutely, Zachary. Well, what's interesting is that Republicans in the House and the Senate both disagree with a lot of things that President Trump has done, but they give him very high marks for his nomination and subsequent confirmation of Justice Gorsuch. So for Republicans, they're looking forward to the president making another selection that's largely based on a list that Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell gave to him after that first absence on the bench. So Republicans already, as we speak, Zachary, I'm seeking out a meeting of the Senate Judiciary Committee. We're going to be hearing from those members who are going to be in charge of confirming the next Supreme Court justice. Already, Republicans are telling us that they want the president to nominate somebody who is obviously qualified, who displays judicial restraint, is from that list that Republicans gave to him. Democrats, however, are sounding notes of caution. They're saying that obviously Justice Kennedy was particularly well known as being that critical middle ground swing vote. So they want the president to keep that in mind when he's nominating somebody else. But Republicans up here are agreeing with his time frame that he laid out, saying he should do this, Zachary, before the midterms.
Allie, thank you so much for your help there on the Hill. You are right in there. What's the general sense from folks there? Is there a level of, what do folks anticipate specifically on the Republican side?
Yeah, look, I think Republicans are running a victory lap right now. They have seen President Trump as somebody who can implement what they want to see in terms of judicial decisions. Look at the decisions that this court has handed down at the end of this term. They've been big decisions that conform to Republican views on things like unionizing, religious freedom, obviously restoring the president's travel ban. These are all things that, look, Republicans may not agree with every individual detail of the policies that have been defended by the Supreme Court. Yeah.
I'm gonna have to cut you off here, Allie. We're gonna take the president now. He's live at the White House. We're gonna go to the White House now. Here's the president.
And he's a man that I've known for a long time and a man that I've respected for a long time. He's been a great justice of the Supreme Court. He is a man who is displaying great vision. He's displayed tremendous vision and tremendous heart, and he will be missed, but he will be retiring, and we will begin our search for a new justice of the United States Supreme Court that will begin immediately. and hopefully we're going to pick somebody who will be as outstanding. So I just want to thank Justice Kennedy for the years of tremendous service. He's a very spectacular man, really a spectacular man. And I know that he will be around hopefully for a long time to advise, and I believe he's going to be teaching and doing other things. So thank you to Justice Kennedy. Okay. Thank you.
Who will you pick to replace him, sir?
Thank you. Thanks, everyone.
Well, we have obviously numerous people. We have a list of 25 people that I actually had during my election. I had to 20, and as you know, I added 5 a little while ago. We have a very excellent list of great talented, highly educated, highly intelligent, hopefully tremendous people. I think the list is very outstanding. When I was running, I put down a list of 20 people because, not being a politician, I think people wanted to hear what some of my choices may be, and it was pretty effective. And I think you see the kind of quality that we're looking at when you look at that list. But I added 5 additional people to the list. So it will be somebody from that list. So we have now boiled it down to about 25 people.
And sir, when did you find out?
To the World Cup with President Putin, the final?
Yes, no, I will tell you, we fought very hard to get it here. I think they're doing a fantastic job with the World Cup right now. It's in Russia, and I will tell you that it's exciting. My son loves soccer, and he loves watching the World Cup, and they have really done a fantastic job with the World Cup. It's exciting, even if you're a non-soccer fan. I'm a soccer fan a little bit, but I don't have much time.
What are you rooting for?
But, well, I'm rooting for everybody to do well. But I think the venue has been fantastic. They really have shown something very special. I fought very hard to get it for the United States, Mexico, and Canada, as you probably have heard, and we were honored to be chosen. And this is a great gentleman and a great soccer fan, too. But we were very honored to be chosen for the World Cup, so we look forward to that.
Mr. President, will you meet with President Putin, sir, and where?
Most likely. John Bolton is over there now. He's over in Russia right now. I just saw, watching media, that he's met with President Putin. I haven't gotten the full report yet, but it would look like we will probably be meeting sometime in the not-too-distant future. And I've said it from day one, getting along with Russia and with China and with everybody is a very good thing. It's good for the world, it's good for us, it's good for everybody. So we'll probably be meeting sometime around my trip to Europe.
Do you know where?
Hasn't been determined yet. Probably I will know within an hour.
And what about the injunction on immigration? Will you fight that? The California judge who says reunited families must be put together.
Well, we're going to see, but we believe that families should be together also. So there's not a lot to fight. But
how do you guarantee that?
We believe families have to be together. But what we really do is we believe in very strong borders, no crime, and the Democrats believe in open borders and plenty of crime, because that's what you get with the open borders. I would like to introduce, however, the president of Portugal, and I'm sorry to bother you, but in our country, the selection of a justice of the United States Supreme Court is considered, I think we can all say, one of the most important events, one of the most important things for our country. I mean, you see the decisions that just came down, how big they are, how vital they are, and they can swing different ways depending on whom there might be in the court. So it's always been considered a tremendously important thing. Some people think, outside of obviously war and peace, it's the most important thing that you could have. But another very important thing is introducing the president, the highly respected, I must say, president of Portugal. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, President. Well, as a constitutional law professor, I know how important it is when a justice in your Supreme Court retires, because it's a key institution for a country. So I just heard the news, and I imagine how important it is for you and for any United States president. Anyway, I'd like to tell you that we have a long-lasting friendship and partnership.
Yes.
that started the moment we recognized you. We were the first neutral country to recognize the United States of America's independence. Although we had as our oldest ally England. So it was courageous at that time. And I don't know if you know it, but your founding fathers celebrated independence with our wine, with Madeira wine. They made a toast.
Good taste.
With our Madeira wine. It's a long, long story, this one, our friendship and partnership, based on common values of democracy and freedom and rule of law and human rights, but also of a very strong community. A fellow citizens that are both American and Portuguese, and they love the United States of America, and they love Portugal. There are around 1,500,000 Portuguese, Luso-American living here. They're very important. So it's not just a military, a political, and an economic alliance. It's more than that. It's something very human, because we're speaking of 1,400,000 people that they live their love for two countries at the same time. As you spoke of soccer, let me then ask you something, well, make you a suggestion.
Go ahead.
If you're going to meet Mr. Putin, well, I was with him last week.
Good.
Yes, and he asked me to greet you. So, of course, he was expecting your visit. But anyway, don't forget that Portugal has the best player in the world. That is called Cristiano Ronaldo.
Oh,
I'm sure your son knows it.
He knows all about it.
And so, don't forget, if you ever go to Russia during the championship, don't forget Portugal is still there and wanting to win.
That's right, doing very well.
Yes.
Right. And they say he is
I'm doing very, very, very well.
That's very good. And so tell me, how good a player is he? Are you impressed?
I'm very much impressed. He's the best player of the world, Cristiano Ronaldo. So in a sense, well, I think has been a success. I do agree with you.
Yeah,
the
great.
championship.
Yeah,
Yes.
great. Yeah. I think
no doubt about it. For the world, for the world.
So will Christian ever run for president against you? He wouldn't win. You know he won't.
President, you know something. I must tell you, Portugal is not just the United States.
That's
not,
right.
A little bit different.
Yes, go ahead.
Mr. President, when did you learn that Justice Kennedy was retired?
About a half hour ago.
Were you surprised?
He came to the White House. We had a wonderful discussion just prior to meeting the president, and really had a very deep discussion. I got his ideas on things, including I asked him if he had certain people that he had great respect for that potentially could take his seat, which is a very hard seat to fill. So we talked about different things, and he was here for about a half an hour. I don't think you folks saw him come in and out, did you? I'm shocked. Boy, they've done a great job. That's a shocker. That's a shocker. But yeah, we had he just left a little while ago, just prior to meeting the president.
Will you tell us what he recommended? Will you give us any sense?
No, I won't do that. But he has, you know, there are certain names that are just outstanding. Names that you already know, to be honest with you. I mean, there are names that you know that are outstanding, highly respected, names that you would know, President. And we'll be looking at them. We'll be looking at some others. But they will come from the list of 25 people.
And, Mr. President, it's an election year. Would you give consideration to holding that spot open until the makeup of Congress is determined come November?
I haven't really thought about that. I think you want to go as quickly as possible. It's a process, but haven't really thought of that. But we had a big day yesterday, very big. We had a great decision today in terms of what was just released by the Supreme Court yesterday, obviously, with the travel ban was extremely big. And we had some tremendous election. South Carolina, from my own standpoint, South Carolina, the governor, McMaster, was a big win. And as you know, I was very much involved in New York with the Congressman, Donovan. So we're very happy. This was a good few days, and now I get to cap it off by meeting with the president of Portugal. And Portugal's been actually very important to our nation. And you're right, we have about 1.5 million people from Portugal here. So that's very important. No, I want them to do what they wanted. You know, the problem we have, and I told them this morning, I said, hey, pass it if you can. But I also want them to do what they want. We have a big immigration bill like everybody does, like you're talking, and everybody talks about immigration now, I think, more than ever before. I told them a few hours ago, I said, look, pass something or come back with something that would be a derivation, but get something you want. The problem we have is we need Democratic votes in the Senate, and that's why I don't get overly excited with the House bill right now, because it's not going to pass in the Senate. You're not going to get the Democrats to vote for anything. If we gave them 100% of what they wanted and then doubled it, they still wouldn't pass it because they think it's a good election point. I think it's good for us because I think strong borders, I don't even know how you feel about that, but I think strong borders and no crime that's us. And I think that's going to be a great election point for us. So I told them 2 hours ago, I said, do what you want. And ultimately, we'll come to something, and perhaps it'll be after the election, maybe it'll be before. But as of this moment, Democrats are not going to vote for anything because they really are resisting or obstructing. Okay? Thank you very much.
Mr. President, what about the progressive, sir?
Well, I think we'll be talking about Syria. I think we'll be talking about Ukraine. I think we'll be talking about many other subjects, and we'll see what happens. So you never know. You never know about meetings, what happens, right? But I think a lot of good things can come with meetings with people. We had great meetings with President Xi of China. We have, every place I've been, we have had great meetings. So maybe something positive will come out of it.
Mr. President, what about the progressive challenger that beat Joe Crowley, that young woman from New York? Are you worried about a blue wave?
Well, that was a shocker. Losing for Crowley to lose that election, that was a shocker. I was surprised. Everybody was surprised. We had somebody that's been in there for many years, Mr. President, and I think he probably took it for granted. And I can't say that I'm disappointed because I was never a big fan. But he lost his election. Probably shouldn't have lost his election. Maybe you get a little complacent, that does happen. You get complacent, and he lost. That's a big loss. I tell you what, that was a shocking loss, but it is what it is. Thank you all very much.
Mr. President, sir, Mr. President, are you worried your tariffs are backfiring?
No, they're doing great.
You think even with
By the way, the steel industry is absolutely doing great. The tariffs have been incredible, and the steel industry is doing great, and our country is doing great. You're seeing the results. The numbers coming out from the companies are far beyond what anybody ever thought possible. We're doing really good. But we have to have fair trade deals, and we're working on really fair trade deals. We're working with your representatives on fair trade deals. So
I heard you're going to receive President Juncker. That's good news.
Yes.
That's good news.
Thank you, everybody. They're working. It's going to be very good.
And Mr. President, as far as when you might meet with Putin, will it be after NATO?
Probably after.
Right after NATO.
Probably after.
Okay. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
You're watching action there at the White House. The president of Portugal and President Trump there having a meeting talking about a number of different items, from immigration to a little bit of soccer, and Vladimir Putin even mentioned there. But the big news today that Justice Anthony M. Kennedy has retired. I'm joined now by Rick Klein. He's in Washington, D.C. Rick, I understand that you have some other details on this developing story.
The president was informed personally by Justice Kennedy about 30 minutes before he addressed the press a few moments ago, got this letter hand-delivered by Justice Kennedy, and revealing that he talked a little bit about who might his successor be, although we didn't get any details on these names. The president also revealing that he would choose someone from his list of about 25, about 24 people, a list that he produced during the campaign, expanded on since then. He says it will be someone from that list. And the big news in terms of the time frame, the president saying he wants to move quickly on this, and Mitch McConnell, the Senate Majority Leader, who famously held up President Obama's selection in the final year of his presidency, says that the push will be on to move quickly on this nomination. They are not going to abide by any such standard in a congressional election year, and it sets up just a historic battle for the stake of the Supreme Court and the future maybe of the country in a whole realm of areas because of the way that the court is aligned and the potential for President Trump's pick to swing the balance on a whole range of issues involving civil rights, abortion rights, gay rights, and the like.
Mm-hmm. Really, really important information coming out there. We appreciate you so much, Rick Klein. We're going to head over now and talk to Kate Shaw. We understand that she is on the phone. She studied this stuff. She's a former clerk. Kate, help me better understand what this means. Again, let's revisit this idea of balance and what this decisively swing position in the loss of it means.
Of course, President Trump second opportunity to fill a seat on the Supreme Court. But this is much more important than that vacancy that he had the chance to fill when Justice Antonin Scalia died. So Justice Scalia was a reliable conservative. Mitch McConnell successfully prevented President Obama from, cementing a liberal majority on the court. But when President Trump put Neil Gorsuch on the court, he just restored the kind of 4-1-4 balance of the court for liberals, for conservatives, and then Anthony Kennedy, kind of a consummate swing justice. With the opportunity to fill that swing seat, there really is the chance to cement a conservative majority on the court. And if you put somebody young enough on there, it could be for decades to come. And I think the areas that you've been talking about, gay rights, abortion, some issues related to the death penalty, these are these kind of social issues that have been 5-4 kind of issues on the court for many, many years. Roe versus Wade probably sort of first among them. And in every abortion case, the court has divided 5-4 in the last 3 decades, striking down some abortion laws, upholding others, but kind of affirming the core right to an abortion under the Constitution that the court first set forth.
Kate Shaw on the phone for us. Thank you so much for playing along for us today. Again, big news. Justice Anthony M. Kennedy is retiring. The White House has put out a statement thanking him for his 30 years of what they call distinguished service. They go on to say, Justice Kennedy has been a tireless voice for individual rights and the founder's enduring vision of limited government. His words have left an indelible mark not only on this generation, but on the fabric of American history. I'm joined again now by Terry Moran. Terry, you've been so helpful in this today as we think about the process, and that's my question for you now. What does the process of this look like going forward?
Well, it's going to be a trial by fire for whoever steps into the nominee's place. So President Trump has a short list of choices. These are very conservative judges who've been vetted already by lawyers outside and inside the administration. They like them. They like them. They think they're reliable conservatives reflecting the views of the president and the people who sent him to the White House. So I don't think it's going to take a long time for President Trump to choose. He knows this group of potential Supreme Court nominees. Then there'll be an FBI investigation. The Senate Judiciary Committee will take an investigation. Then the main event, the hearings. That nominee steps out before the Senate Judiciary Committee and the world. And will usually do a tap dance, dodging any kind of question that might get him or her in trouble. But you can bet the Democrats on the Judiciary Committee are going to go after this nominee hammer and tongs. And then the Senate will debate. And it will take, in this Senate, just 50 votes and Vice President Pence's vote, if it is a tie, to get this nominee out of the Supreme Court. It is going to be months long, although we've heard from Senator McConnell. He wants to have this vote just before the election in the fall, to put maximum pressure on Democrats from states where President Trump won, who are going to be hearing it from their more conservative constituents that they don't want a nominee who looks fairly reasonable, conservative, blocked, just to side with the Democrats. So we're going to see just a Donnybrook of a fight going forward.
It's an interesting time that we're in, and the ability for somebody to play that key role of the justice, just as Kennedy had done for all those years, maybe now more important than ever. Terry, before we wrap up here, I'm curious if you have any final thoughts on Kennedy's legacy.
You know, I do. The swing vote will probably shift to Chief Justice John Roberts, who's very conservative, but now, given what we're likely to see, he'll be somewhere in the middle. And he has an institutional concern. He doesn't want to see the Supreme Court get in the muck and the turmoil and the mud fight that we're all having on the political side. But there's one thing that strikes me as I've looked down the list of potential replacements for Justice Kennedy. This is a generational change on the court. Neil Gorsuch, to a lesser degree Elena Kagan, and now this next nominee, all people who were born in the 1960s. Justice Kennedy born in the 1930s. And you are seeing a change, not just in age, but in temperament. These new judges and justices came up in a much more contentious political era. They were in their 20s when the Bork nomination and the Clarence Thomas nomination were fought. So in some ways, they're used to political fights around the court. And they're sharper edged, I think, in their ideologies. Kennedy and some of the older judges had a different view of what the Supreme Court justice should do. more removed from the political debate. I think a lot of these newer justices came up in a different era, and they're ready to duke it out just as we are, out, as I say, in the muck and the mire and the turmoil of our current political moment.
Unbelievable. Terry Moran for us. Thank you so much for all your insight. Again, big news today. Justice Kennedy has decided to retire. It'll be interesting to see how this plays out in the context of race and sexual identity and women's rights as this country continues to march forward during a very, very volatile time. I'm Zachary Keish here in the ABC News Live studio. We appreciate you joining us. Have a great day.